So Dan Manges, thank you for joining me today on Silicon Heartland Sessions. This is part of what makes our community so special is great leaders like you in our community who are willing to share your experience and your wisdom with the community. So thanks for being here, Dan.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Sean.
Yeah, my pleasure. My pleasure. So you're the co-founder of a company called RWX. And for those who aren't familiar with RWX, how'd you come up with that name and what does RWX do?
So we build developer tools. We're software engineers that create actually tools that are used for building software. So we create software that you can use for building software. Interestingly, when we started the company, my co-founder, Tommy, and I, a couple of years ago, we actually didn't have a specific product in mind that we wanted to build. And we knew the space we wanted to work in. We felt like there was an opportunity there, but we thought we'd initially do a bunch of kind of research and development and experimentation. So RWX comes from file system permissions on Linux operating systems, and they stand for read, write, execute. So engineers are used to seeing the letters RWX in their terminals all the time. But we thought it was an apt metaphor for what we'd be doing, which would be reading and researching, hopefully writing and publishing some things, but then also not just being academic about it, but doing hands-on work and actually executing. So we love the name. And actually one of my best friends came up with it. He had used it for a group chat of friends that I've had for over a decade and some of the people I learned the most about building software from. And I asked him if I could appropriate the name from the group chat and use it for the name of the company.
Heck yeah. That's a very unique name. When I first saw RWX, that's exactly what came to my mind.
Yeah, it's a little bit of an inside reference for engineers, which feels great for a developer tools company.
Yeah, but I love the double entendre too.
Yeah.
So something that appeals to the engineers in the community, but also, serves kind of a higher purpose or higher definition. So very, very cool.
Yeah, thank you.
And you've got some, you're welcome. So, and you've got a storied, sort of journey in technology. RWX isn't your first gig. You were with Root and other companies. Can you maybe briefly talk a bit about your history and kind of what brought you to being the co-founder of a software company for building software, RWX?
Sure. This is actually my third startup. I began my career and spent a couple of years in the enterprise, and then spent a couple of years doing some consulting, and then I was fortunate to join startup Braintree, which was a payments company, in 2008. And at the time, Braintree wasn't a venture-backed startup. It was just a small bootstrap payments company. But the founder was looking to build some new technology. And I joined the company and became the first CTO there. And we built software to help merchants accept credit card payments online and in their mobile apps. Stripe is a more notable player in that space now, but Braintree was actually started around the same time and eventually was acquired by PayPal. But Braintree, our most notable client was Uber. So I'm sure almost everybody listening to this probably at this point has taken an Uber at some point. That experience where you get out of the car and your credit card gets charged, those transactions were processed by the payments platform that I built along with the team there.
That's awesome.
And I was there for 5 years, from 2008 until 2013. And the company was acquired by PayPal in 2013 for $800 million.
Wow. That is incredible.
It was really an amazing experience, especially because, again, it was the small bootstrap company at the start. Like I suppose we knew payments was a big market, but so many startups now, just from the onset, they're talking about how to become a unicorn or how to IPO one day. And we had big ambitions to do big and impactful things, but that wasn't really the mindset going into it. The mindset was, hey, payments is something that affects a lot of businesses. The experience isn't great, especially as engineers are looking to create great checkout experiences inside their applications. They don't really have the technology and the API for it. There isn't a single payments provider that is really providing great technology. Let's see if we can build something interesting. And it turned into way more than what we really anticipated. We were a few years into it, and we did raise a round of venture capital, but just one in 2011 before then being acquired in 2013.
Wow. Talk about success. Do you think, does PayPal still use code that you wrote when you were at
Absolutely.
Braintree, do
I'm
you
sure
think?
they still, well, I don't know at this point. It's been a decade, but I would not be surprised if there's a line of code I wrote that, just hasn't been touched in 10 years, still floating around there somewhere.
Heck yeah.
But Braintree is actually a big part of PayPal's business. They always, I forget how they talk about it on earnings. It's labeled interestingly, something about like, non-PayPal payments volume or something like that. And everybody always knows it's referring to Braintree, but still like a very big player in the payments space with some very large merchants that process their transactions through Braintree's payments platform.
Wow. That's impressive. Very cool, man. And then you said you're also the co-founder of Root.
Right. So after Braintree, I spent 5 years in Chicago and then left in 2013, moved back to Ohio. I spent a couple years experimenting with some ideas, helping some friends launch their startups, doing some consulting, but hadn't really found something that I was ready to pour myself into. And then in 2015, was fortunate to get connected with a group of people that were putting the idea for Root together. For those who are listening and don't know, Root is a technology-powered car insurance carrier. We started the company to price insurance primarily based on actual driving behavior. So traditionally, insurance was priced on demographics, age, gender, credit score, but obviously, two people of the same age and gender could drive very differently from each other. One person could be aggressive and reckless. Somebody else might be responsible and safe. And really, they shouldn't be paying the same price for insurance. So our idea was to build a mobile application that people could install, use the sensors on the mobile phone to gather data on driving behavior, and then price insurance that way. So I connected with the founding team in 2015, and we started a company to pursue that idea. And I spent 6 years there building the company. We started in 2015 and we went public in 2020, which was remarkably fast.
No kidding. Wow.
And then I stayed through 2021 and ended up starting RWX in 2022.
Wow. Well, congratulations on starting RWX, and talk about an interesting, journey that you've taken. Like I can't even imagine, with somebody with your, passion for technology and developer tools and so forth as it stands, going into insurance and building, this insurance platform for a startup. That's really amazing.
Yeah, it was really daunting because I talked to a lot of people, and I read headlines and press releases of the technology investment that big insurance carriers were making, and I talked to a lot of people about building policy management systems and all the software that's necessary to run an insurance carrier, because I was trying to figure out if it was even possible to do with just a handful of engineers. I mean, that's all we had at the start. We had some seed funding, but we had a really small team. And eventually got to the point where I had the conviction that it was possible. I knew it would be hard. I knew it would take an extraordinarily talented team and still take some time to be able to create everything we needed to. And we actually looked at potentially building some of our own technology, but then partnering for the rest. Maybe we'd build the mobile app together, the driving data, but then, purchase software from a vendor to facilitate the rest of it. But we recognized that the entire user experience was going to be really important. And if we wanted to be able to build a really great consumer experience in insurance, that we needed to control the technology stack from end to end. So we decided to go through the monumental undertaking of building all of that software ourselves.
That's amazing. Yeah, I mean, and when you think about some of those accomplishments, not just building the companies, but building these software solutions, for lack of a better word, these software solutions that form the foundation for these companies. I can't imagine the kinds of obstacles that you faced along the way, the sort of, when you think about being an entrepreneur like you, there's a certain mindset that you have to have that is, in my mind, the word that comes to mind is resilient. We were talking earlier, and you're talking about some of the books that you use to, for inspiration, books like Meditations and The Way of Zen and The Obstacle is the Way, and even the great and very, very huge book Sapiens as sources of inspiration. And I'm curious. There's a lot of really great information on the internet about Stoicism, and it seems to me, I don't know if there's a kind of an overlap between the concept and the philosophy of Stoicism and being an entrepreneur, being in tech, or elsewhere. But I'm just curious, when you think about that, especially when you think about like the book Meditations from Marcus Aurelius, This book emphasizes, resilience and staying grounded in the face of those the challenges you must have faced. Have there been moments where this mindset has helped you overcome obstacles and push you forward?
There's certainly been a lot across my career journey. And I think it's part of what made me gravitate towards that literature is working through those moments and finding ways, finding inspiration to work through various challenges. I think the thing that I gained the biggest appreciation for as I went through early startup experiences and like that time period is that a lot of study of business feels very academic. You go through college curriculums, you can get an MBA. There's all kinds of books you can read about like leadership and how to manage businesses and how to make decisions and everything. But there's this aspect of it that companies are built by people, and people are inherently emotional creatures. And I feel like you realize this especially when at Root we hired a ton of data scientists and just the smartest people I've ever worked with, PhDs in mathematics. And I feel like when you push the intellectual power of your company that much, you really start to gain an understanding of, what is a intellectual decision and what's kind of more of a somewhat emotional decision. And that, no amount of calculation is going to tell you what the right thing to do is in a situation. Right. So I think it's incredibly important to recognize that and, try to be introspective about your own thoughts and feelings and understand how it ties into your decision making. And I think that's why I've actually found those books, like I'd probably recommend them as some of the most impactful business books to read, even though, they don't say anything about like management or starting a company or any of those topics.
Yeah, very well said. When I think about the life of an entrepreneur, I think about how the future can be so ambiguous, especially when you're trying to drive an idea and you're building an idea, you're encountering engineering challenges, or you're encountering, shifts in the market and these kinds of things that could have a big impact on your strategy. And I'm just, to me, it sounds like what you're saying is that these philosophies have served as a bit of a North Star for you to help you weave your way through that maze of ambiguity.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think it's really important to understand what you can influence and control and understand what you can't, and make the most out of the decisions that you can make. You don't want to be passive and you don't want to be apathetic, but you also don't want to spend time, being mad about something that has already happened in the past. Really does not serve you well. You want to learn from those experiences. You want to respond to them and let them think about how you might want to do things differently in the future. But you don't want to get caught up on them and dwell on them. And I think, as I was saying when we initially started talking about these books, I think this is just one of the most important things to get right to be effective at building startups, but honestly, at a lot of things in life.
Right. Well, and I tend to feel like resilience and happiness, resilience and gratitude, really go hand in hand. And we've talked a bit about, if you had a theme song for your life, you told me that it would be the song Happy by NF. I'll be perfectly honest with you. I had never heard the song before. So for those that are listening, check out Happy by NF. It's first of all, very inspirational, but it's also just, it's really infectious. I really enjoyed listening to it. And I'm curious, thinking about that as your like personal theme song. As I was listening to it, I was thinking, wow, this song really reflects on things like internal struggles and, this struggle, this pursuit of happiness, so I'm curious, we've talked a lot about resilience and so forth, but how does that mindset, that mindset of happiness influence how you approach both work and personal growth? Are they kind of like a yin and yang kind of a thing for you? Do they go hand in hand? Does one create the other?
I do think they're related. I mean, I think, a lot of people talk about like work-life balance. Sort of like these like two distinct things, like maybe like the TV show Severance, where there's just like two completely bifurcated ways that you spend your time. And I've never really thought about it that way. Like they're both, I think, important, or can and should be. And I get people are going to approach these things differently, but you spend a lot of your life at work, a lot. And
true.
I think people are fortunate when they're spending that time on something that they find meaningful or that they enjoy, not just something to bring home a paycheck. And if that's how they think about it, it's maybe okay too. It's just never been the philosophy that I've had. Coming back to the song, I've had a host of mental health challenges that have been difficult to work through, notably in that time period between Braintree and Root. And I think I felt a strong connection with like many of the lyrics in that song, and actually a lot of NF songs in general.
Wow.
I think music is a great source of inspiration for a lot of people. As a lot of artists are out there singing about life experiences. And I certainly felt that way. I went to NF's Hope Tour. I saw him live 3 times.
Wow.
And I think that song in particular is just one that I resonated really strongly with. And
I can see why,
it's I feel like it's helpful to find people that, even if it's not, somebody personally, that you do feel akin to. And, it's a great thing about like online communities, digital communities. There's always an opportunity to find the people that you can connect and resonate with most strongly. And as we bring this back to business, I find that something that's really important too, is finding people who are somewhat philosophically aligned around what you're trying to accomplish, what your motivations are, and the kind of company that you're trying to build. You're never going to be aligned perfectly. And that's what's great about having like a diverse set of people, is having people who contribute a variety of ideas and push things in different directions. But I think you want enough alignment that you can also work together effectively. And I think those are some of the relationships I've appreciated most in my life, professionally and personally, are the ones where, I feel a strong kindred spirit and, strong philosophical alignment around, what motivates us, like what we're trying to accomplish, how we think about certain situations and things, but then also enough differences to really shape and influence my thinking. I'd just say those have been like some of the best relationships in my life.
That's awesome. So first of all, I want to thank you for your authenticity. I think that, many of us struggle with mental health, and we have phases that we go through where we're struggling and so forth. You used a really good example around, when you have that disconnect at work and you're spending all this time at work, and maybe you're working on something that you're not passionate about. Maybe it's something that doesn't bring you joy. Maybe it's something that you don't agree with, And my follow-up question for that was going to be, in those moments, how do you find happiness, or how do you choose happiness in those moments? But I think you answered it for me. I think the answer is community. It's connecting with others. Is that accurate?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really important part of it. And, I think I ran through in that time period I mentioned, kind of ran through this thought experiment about thinking about like what's meaningful. And I spent a while thinking about just a question of like, okay, like let's say you're the only person on earth. Would it even matter what you would do? It didn't really, seem so. I mean, I guess you could ask about animals on earth or something. But I guess I just emerged from that time period with the idea that, things matter most in terms of shared experiences and impacts and influence on other people, and wanting to try to make that as positive and as meaningful as possible, like in my life. So certainly through challenges and shared experiences, I think people and connection is a really important part of that.
Yeah, I can see that. That's really amazing. When you think about your professional achievements, or I'm curious, are there personal milestones that, kind of along the way have been close to your heart that have helped to shape your journey?
I think the interesting thing for me is that professionally, I really never imagined I'd be in the situations or have the kind of outcomes that I had. And I grew up, without like a mentor, being exposed, that type of environment, grew up in rural Ohio. I remember when I
Mhm.
was maybe like 20, I worked with somebody who was super into like the stock market. And I ended up opening a brokerage account and buying like a few shares of Microsoft or something. And I was so excited that I just bought and owned a stock that I called my parents and I told them because like I didn't know anybody that was like buying stocks.
Hell yeah.
And that's where I was when I was like in my early 20s. So to
Mhm.
then, ring the opening bell of the NASDAQ and take a company public at 35 um, was
Wow.
a really remarkable experience that I'm really grateful for. And I think similarly, you asked about personal triumphs. I also, when I was a kid, like I never really thought I was athletic. I was pretty nerdy, not surprisingly. Spent a lot of time on computers. I was in
Weren't we
band.
all? Yeah.
Those were my interests and hobbies. And
Heck yeah.
honestly, like kind of had some pretty limiting beliefs about like what I was capable of doing. And
Hmm.
much like the professional journey, um, I actually when I worked as a consultant, I was traveling all the time, very out of shape. Like ended up gaining a fair amount of weight just because I was eating out 3 meals a day, and you'd have generous policies to like go out and get dinners as you're traveling and everything. And eventually, I was like, I need to do something about this. And I started running. And at first, I thought like I couldn't even run a mile, and I didn't even think it was going to be possible for me to. I was like, wow, I wonder if like one day I could run a mile in like less than 8 minutes. Like maybe if I work really hard on this for like years, I could get there. And
Hmm.
anyway, I eventually ended up running running the Columbus Marathon. Um, but it stands
Yes.
out as a personal accomplishment. Not, I mean, I am proud to have completed the marathon, but not simply from having done it, but this realization that I spent a decent chunk of my life thinking like I wasn't even capable of doing something like that. And it's this weird unconscious
Yeah.
bias where, I almost didn't even consider doing it because it's not like I thought about doing it and then I thought I couldn't. It's like I just didn't even consider doing anything like that because I just like inherently believed I wasn't capable of it. So I think like now I'm always really cautious and mindful and try to encourage others to not have those limiting beliefs about like what they're capable of doing, but at the same time to understand where their unique strengths are and really try to help people to encourage them to leverage their unique strengths. I think a lot of people focus on trying to eliminate their weaknesses, and this is probably like another kind of personal business parallel, where oftentimes, instead of being like, "Oh, I'm bad at this," like, how do I get better at it? It's like, well, what could you actually be really great at, and focus on that.
I love that. This really resonates with me. I didn't anticipate that we would go down this path. But first of all, I'll say this is very inspiring to me, and I agree with you. I think a lot of folks don't allow themselves to start the journey because, and I kind of go back to like you having this entrepreneurial mindset. When you have an entrepreneurial mindset, you think about the goal, and it's not about how I'm going to get there. This is about this obviously at the end of the day, it's about how I get there. But this is like the obstacle is the way. I know I'm going to have obstacles to get there, but here's the thing. Every journey starts with one step. And I think people get wrapped around this idea that, there's a magic formula or there's certain skills that they have to go acquire. They have to go sign up with some
Right.
trainer or some special thing or take some supplement or something
Yeah,
like
yeah.
that. And you're the opposite. You're like, hey, I here's a goal. It's maybe it's a modest goal, maybe it's a big goal, I don't know, but I'm going to go out and figure out how to run an 8-minute mile. And then along the way you find that I'm now I'm running a marathon.
Yeah.
I mean, that is really that's really inspirational. I think that, and I think there's a hell of a lot of wisdom for the community. And let's face it, we work in technology. It's a very sedentary kind of a profession. It takes mindfulness to to get up and to stand up and to get exercise in and to pursue those kinds of things. Not to mention, it's just, we're talking about work-life balance and so forth.
Right.
It's just hard to find the time.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
I feel like we could probably do a whole podcast on your journey to running a marathon, and maybe we'll do that. Like seriously, I think that would be a really cool conversation.
Yeah, I think you can see the parallels.
If you'd be interested.
5 years of building payments technology, 6 years of building insurance technology. Like, I kind of like these like long, arduous, journeys. And I think going back to what you're saying, I feel fortunate to have had the outcomes that I've had, with the business experiences that I've had. But I think to acknowledge what you said and like the obstacles away, I think it really is the journey that is the most satisfying. And I see a lot of people get caught up on the outcomes in ways that can feel very discouraging, because it's easy. Like when you're trying to run a marathon, it feels like you're so far from that goal. And if that's what you focus on, it sometimes can be difficult to stay motivated or recognize your progress. But you really just have to focus on, one foot in front of each other for, an extended period of time. But you keep taking those steps, and like eventually you get there. Or you know what? Maybe you don't get there. But I think the thing that a lot of people will take pride in is the journey and is the effort.
Yeah.
Because the outcome can be circumstantial. And I could honestly, Sean, we could do a whole podcast episode on like the number of ways that I and the companies I've worked on, like, we're lucky. And, if certain things would have happened, could have had like vastly different outcomes. And I think if that would have happened, like I still would have walked away with a lot of meaning from those experiences, because that is a meaningful part, is, the effort I put into it, the care I had, the people I worked with, the relationships that I built. At least for me, that's where the meaning is.
That is so well said. And you talked about big arduous journeys. Not obviously you've had some big arduous journeys on the personal side of things, but you've also obviously had some big, audacious, I would say, arduous journeys on the professional side. When you think about these journeys, especially on the professional side of things, leadership is incredibly important. You have to have the right leaders to help the folks that are being led, the folks on the team, to see the path forward, to see the vision. So I'm curious, from your experience leading teams at RWX, at Root, at Braintree, what are the leadership qualities that you believe have the greatest impact on building and motivating teams?
I think the most important part of that question was when you mentioned the folks on the team. Because I feel like this gets missed a lot in discussions around leadership, in that it is tough. When you're leading a big group of people, you kind of have no choice but to try to lead in a way that works across a wide variety of people. But I think that recognizing that people are unique, and that people are going to be motivated by different things. They're going to have different ways they prefer to work. Different skill sets they can apply and things to latch onto, and ways that they like to collaborate. I think understanding that is one of the most underrated things for effective leadership. Because you see it all the time. You see advice. It's like, well, deliver feedback this way. It's like, well, who are you delivering the feedback to? And like, what kind of feedback do they want? Is blunt, direct feedback the best thing to give to them? Maybe for some people, yes, but maybe for other people, no. Like maybe they'll, be demotivated and discouraged. And I think the thing to really focus on is just how to, in those interpersonal relationships, how to make the most impact. Like, think about what you're trying to accomplish, and think about the best way to try to get a group of people to accomplish those goals, recognizing that you really do need to understand their motivations and capabilities, and the best way to interact with them. So I don't really believe that there's like a one size fits all leadership strategy. I think the best leaders are honestly just very thoughtful, very perceptive, and very empathetic towards people.
That's what I was going to say. It sounds to me like, kind of going back to what you were saying earlier about the importance of relationships, knowing the people on your team and adapting your communication style, your leadership style, so that it's the most effective for the variety of different people on your team.
For sure. And it's really hard to do because as I acknowledged, like as teams get bigger, it gets tough because you can't individualize and adapt that much as you try to lead an increasingly bigger and bigger team. But that's one of the things that makes startups special is that you can adapt a little bit more. And I think one of the biggest mistakes people make in leadership, and honestly, even on the other side of things, as people are like maybe in an individual contributor role inside of a company, is assuming other people are like them, assuming that other people are going to think about situations or be motivated by the things that like they're motivated by. And you see this all the time in the discourse. You see, people criticizing like return to office policies because they're like, oh, well, nobody wants to whatever. And it's like, well, nobody like, some people might like, I get like some people want to work from home all the time, but some people want to go into the office all the time. And I think dismissing or failing to acknowledge that people are going to vary in, the things, like the way they think about things, sometimes results in just, really poor leadership. So it's tough, but I think, you asked me about like poor leadership qualities. And I think this idea, I don't know how to like distill it down succinctly, but I think this idea is one of the most important ones.
Yeah. I have to imagine, I get the sense from you that, even within this framework of adapting your leadership style to meet the needs of the people on your team, that you approach all of that with a sense of calmness and clarity. It kind of, goes back to, in my mind, some of the conversation we were having earlier about like the way of Zen. How do you, apply those principles, particularly when you're leading during difficult times? How do you make sure that you keep that foundation of calmness and clarity so that you can then be the most effective leader?
Yeah, I think really, there are a lot of situations where you have to make decisions under pressure. And I've always tried to make those decisions with basically a lot of conviction. I think one thing that has helped me a lot in my career is that I've always been willing to make the decision that I felt was right, without, I guess, much regard for the risk of being wrong. And this is, I guess, to say what I just said another way, like I've never really been worried about like getting fired if I was making the right decision. And it's hard because that comes from a very privileged position. Like not everybody has the luxury of worrying about that. But I think, in terms of like decisions under pressure, I've always worked to just have as much conviction as possible and not be afraid to mess up. And I see a lot of people make really risk averse decisions where they're more worried about like, well, if this goes wrong, how can I make sure that's not my fault? And sometimes in decisions under pressure, you could see that. But sometimes, honestly, Sean, you also see it in like routine decisions. Like there's that classic business cliche, nobody got fired for buying IBM, which probably doesn't make sense anymore. But, like 30 years ago, it was just the idea that like, well, if you're choosing a vendor, choose a vendor that everybody else chooses. And then if it ends up not working out, you can be like, well, this wasn't my fault. I went with IBM. Everybody goes with IBM. I've always been willing to be contrarian, to have conviction that, through conversations and analysis and like input from other people and everything, the decision was the right way to go, and then just commit to that path. And you don't want to do that callously. You want to think through risk factors. You want to think through one of the leadership principles I love is Amazon's like one-way door versus two-way doors. What does it look like to undo this decision if it's the wrong one, and be really mindful of that. So you do want to put a lot of thought into these things, but I think to do big things, you sometimes have to be bold. You have to make risky decisions, and you can't, worry if you start prioritizing like, well, how do I minimize the risk to myself if this goes wrong? You're just going to do less ambitious things, I think.
Yeah, I would agree. It kind of reminds me of, that book, The Obstacle is the Way. And this whole idea of, turning challenges into opportunities. Can you share a time when you used a difficult situation to, fuel growth either for yourself or your company?
There were actually pretty big ones. Actually, both at Braintree and Root. I mean, the most notable one at Root is we talked at the top of the show about building all the technology to run a car insurance carrier. But actually, we didn't start out doing that from day one. We initially thought we would build the technology to gather driving data and then end up like partnering with another insurance carrier maybe. And like, we'd take our data, combine it with their insurance operations and like get started that way. Yeah. But as I shared, like we realized that we just weren't going to be able to build the quality of product and experience that we really wanted to be able to create on top of somebody else's technology. So it was, a question of like, let's just go and build this. And as I shared, I talked to a ton of people that talked about the magnitude of investments in technology these big insurance carriers make. And, Progressive spent $100 million on whatever, and you have 4 engineers in like 6 months. So that was a tough decision to make. Like a lot of people thought that was crazy. And actually, you know what? This is kind of happened in every startup, even with what we're doing now at RWX. When we first started the company, we built and shipped a few really small tools. And I find this a lot in startups. And even having the wealth of startup experience that I've had, I still approached it this way, like this time around at RWX, where it was like, okay, we need customer validation. What we need to do is get our product into market as fast as possible, build an MVP, and then get feedback on it and iterate on it and get product market fit and, learn from customers. And I find that some people almost reduce this down to like, this process by which you're hardly doing anything at all. And then just trying to get your customers to tell you, or trying to get, companies out there that aren't even your customers yet to like tell you what to build. Like, give me the problem and I'll go solve it. And I actually find that some of the best things are built by, I personally think, like having more conviction behind the idea. So we did this at RWX. We actually spent a while. We built and shipped like a couple small products and we got some paying customers on it. We had some traction and everything, but it just didn't feel right to us. So then we actually took a step back and we spent over a year with our entire engineering team building an entirely new product before we could have anybody use it. And we kind of talked to some people about it along the way. But it's really hard with a product in this space to get feedback on something that's vaporware that doesn't actually exist. And that was a big decision to spend an entire year's worth of capital burn and people's time and energy to build this product that literally nobody was using. But we felt like we had to make that pivot because to really have the magnitude of impact that we wanted to have on developer tooling, we felt like it was just going to take that much engineering effort. And I know you got me back on the show in a couple of years, and I'll let you know if that was the right decision or not.
Yeah, no kidding. How long did it take you to, after you pivoted and you decided, we have to go back to the drawing board? How long did it take you to come out on the other side with an actual workable, with essentially, I would assume that's Mint, right?
Yeah, it's Mint. It's our continuous integration platform. It's effectively for the non-technical people listening to the show. It's basically a cloud computing platform that engineering teams use to run all the automation that they want to run on top of code changes. So when engineers make code changes, they always run through a process called continuous integration where they run other code to make sure that the code change is good, that nothing broke. There's a lot of automated test suites and various checks and things that have to run. So it's a really critical part of the overall software development lifecycle. And that's why we felt like there was an opportunity to make a really meaningful impact on engineering productivity here, is because of how critical this piece of the process is. But we felt like a lot of the existing platforms were a bit stagnant. They'd been built a long time ago, hadn't really evolved very much since that time. And your question of how long, I think we discussed going down this path at the end of 2022. But we did have a few products in the works that we kind of wanted to see through, and we finished that up and started working on this in early 2023. And we launched it earlier this year in 2024, but we're now coming up on fall of 2024 before we really got the product in a great spot. But it's been worth it. And maybe it wouldn't have been, but back to the obstacles away and like the focus on the journey. I think exploring this space was certainly worth exploring, and understanding what's actually capable was worth it. And we didn't know there was a fair amount of technical risk in doing this, that it may not have even been possible to build the things that we wanted to build. But our team worked through that. we have a team of exceptionally talented software engineers who are thoughtful not just about building technology, but about like what the right technology was to build, which is critically important when we're building tools for developers. And we've come to the other side of that with a product that we're really proud of, and are focused on growing it from here now.
Yeah, well, congratulations.
Yeah, thank you.
Heck yeah. I am really curious, after you pivoted, did you have any challenges with your team? And obviously you've got a great team of engineers and other folks that work at RWX, but it's no small feat to align your entire team to a new vision, and then helping them to see that vision throughout the course of those years it took you to actually get to the goal line. Did you have any challenges along the way? And do you sort of go back to the philosophies we were talking earlier about your leadership style and so forth, and using those concepts to help you to weave through that ambiguity?
And most of my startup experiences and at this one through this pivot at RWX, aligning the team is really important because you want everybody kind of rowing in the same direction. And moving towards the same objective, but it's surprisingly hard to do. Back to the part of our conversation around people being individual, like everybody has their own set of experiences and thoughts and emotions about what we're trying to accomplish and what the risks are, and what's the most important thing to get right. So even though we all knew we were building this continuous integration platform, and we knew there were a whole host of technical things that I won't get into that we wanted to try to incorporate into it, I think if you asked everybody on our team exactly what that was going to look like, everybody would have had a different answer. And I think this is why it's really important to approach building software very collaboratively and iteratively. And I think it's why waterfall methodologies generally don't work well. And I'm actually surprised at how frequently they're still used in various projects, because I think the best way to align a team is constant calibration. It's take a few steps and calibrate, take a few steps and calibrate.
Okay.
You want to minimize like whiplash, but you feel the whiplash a lot less if you're adjusting as you go than if you just go down a path for a long extended period of time and then realize that you're like all in different spots. So one of the things I love about software is it's inherently collaborative. We're all working on, for the most part, there's different ways of building software, but a lot of times you have a big engineering team working on a single code base, and that does kind of necessitate some degree of alignment about how you're building technology, because you have a lot of hands that are all working on this one shared code repository. And for us at RWX, it's interesting. When we first started the company, we tried to work very asynchronously. And some companies do this and they're well known for it. No meetings, only memos, like that kind of like asynchronous collaboration. And we shifted over time to doing a daily stand-up. And, you talk about, there are engineers that, really loathe those. They hate having a meeting every single day. But we found just talking through stuff is really important for relationship building, especially as we're working remotely, and really important for this calibration. So I think, in terms of inspiring and aligning a team towards like a common vision, a lot of it for me just comes down to that communication and collaboration and constant calibration.
Yeah, in fact, you took the question right out of my mouth. I was going to ask you, how you go about doing those collaborations, and to your point, daily stand-ups, daily communications, talking it through every day. So obviously, you're very passionate about CI/CD platforms and so forth. I'm really curious, when you think about the evolution of technology and and the media. I know there's a lot of hype around AI, and in particular, the intersection between AI and software engineering, and software engineers worried about AI taking jobs and so forth. How do you see, the evolution of technologies like AI impacting software engineering, platform engineering, and in particular, CI/CD tools, and tools that are designed by their very nature, as you said, to be to support the collaborative nature of software development?
Yeah, it's going to have a big impact. And I don't think anybody quite yet can say exactly how, but I think everybody feels that looming. I want to talk about CI a little bit, and then maybe I'll share my perspectives on AI as it impacts software engineering. I think one of the reasons I'm most excited about what we're doing with Mint, our CI platform, is that right now you have humans making code changes, and they make maybe a handful of code changes a day. And this automation that runs on top of those code changes does become problematic for a lot of companies. Like, it's usually slow, it becomes expensive, sometimes it's unreliable, like the automation fails, and this becomes burdensome. And it's a reason that we feel like there's an opportunity here to like solve all of those problems that are inherent in this process today. But companies are feeling this pain when they have humans making changes, and they're making a handful of changes a day. If companies really want to unleash AI and start using AI to make changes, presumably with a much higher frequency of change, then getting this process right is going to be even more important. And it's especially going to be more important if an AI is going to need to learn, if it's going to need to be able to make a code change and understand, oh, what did this code change break? And how do I fix my own mistakes? And I think, most people would agree that if you could give some of that feedback, back into the AI models, that they'll be able to be more effective. Well, that feedback comes from continuous integration platforms. So I'm especially excited. I was already excited about the impact that we could make on software engineering, before this surge in AI-assisted development. And I think I'm even more excited by it now, because I think it'll just be even more important.
I love it.
I think, though, in terms of like AI's actual impact on software engineering, I think for me, as it stands today, it's replaced Google, and it's way more effective. Like, the things that I used to look up by searching for them in Google, I now just ask an LLM, and I get better answers, and I get better answers faster, and I get more helpful answers, which has been really great. But I think we're really far from these models being able to truly make an impact on software engineering. It's kind of the classic like easy, hard, Pareto 80-20 type of thing. As it stands today, I think AI models make easy things easier. I haven't seen them yet make hard things easier. And I think about some of the changes, some of the software that we're building and the changes that we're making. And I think an AI is pretty far from being able to like really do that work. Or even if they do it, the hard part isn't writing the code. The hard part's like understanding the systems and the impacts and all of that. And I think we're just not quite there with AI models yet. And we probably won't be, there's like, I don't have the depth of expertise as I think some other people you've brought on the show in this area so far. But even like context windows and things like that, like, we need an AI to understand a lot more to be able to like truly make a large sweeping change across the system than what's really capable of doing today. But it is highly effective at making easy things easier. And I think stuff like prototyping is going to be radically changed by AI models. Yeah. There's just a big difference between building a prototype and, building like the entirety of the software necessary to run a car insurance company.
Yeah, I would agree. I guess the way I tend to think about it, and I agree with you. First of all, I commend you. You're again demonstrating this mindset that you have, turning obstacles and challenges into opportunities. Which I think is a lesson that we all can benefit from. I tend to, I agree with you. I am of the belief that software engineering, software development, platform engineering, these things are ultimately human endeavors, because we're building software solutions to solve business problems, to solve human problems. And sure, to your point, there are certain steps along the way that we can use artificial intelligence to accelerate an outcome. But at the end of the day, there's a certain amount, it's probably very, very debatable, but there's a certain amount of human ingenuity and innovation and so forth that goes into these kinds of endeavors that probably will never be able to be simulated through an artificial intelligence.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. It'd be different if we actually have AGI, but I don't think like the current work being done with Gen AI and LLMs is really kind of the same thing as true AGI. I know it looks similar in some contexts, but I think the inherent methodology and how it produces answers isn't really like along the same path. So
Yeah.
certainly
Yeah, I hear
be world changing if we do invent AGI. But I think until we get there, humans are going to be a critical part of the process. It's just that the way we work is, and how we spend our time, and the leverage that we can get, like that stuff is all going to change, but not, I think, more in a way that changes how we work than like, I don't know, if we work, or if the machines are just totally taking over. I think we have a ways to go before that happens.
And for those listening, AGI stands for artificial general intelligence, right? This idea that an AI that can act sort of autonomously in the world in a variety of different contexts.
Yeah, one thing that's really really interesting to me is that I kind of feel like we skipped a step. I feel like in software engineering, there is still a tremendous impact to build better tools, to architect software, to isolate changes. And I think the thrashing that happens right now with different frameworks and languages and like ways that people approach projects and databases and everything, I think is indicative of the fact that we haven't really figured that out yet. But I actually think there's order of magnitude gains to be had just within how software is architected and leveraging like static analysis and different language design better. I mean, most of programming languages used today were also like invented like a pretty long time ago. And I actually think there's still opportunity even before we get to the AI applications. And I kind of wonder about those two things in conjunction. And I also wonder like how much more effective could AI be? And I mean the generative AI and like the LLMs, if there was a way of building software that was almost created to be able to better leverage those types of tools. So I think we might see some sort of symbiotic relationships between stuff that's happening kind of on the traditional software engineering tools side of things with the work that's being done by LLMs.
Yeah, I would agree with you. And if we, I'm really curious as to your perspective on the future. And if we sort of broaden the lens, I know everybody's talking AI and AI is really important. But when you think about, maybe like the next 5 to 10 years, and we broaden our lens and we think about, well, not just AI, not just large language models, but AI in general, or automation and cloud computing. How do you, see those technologies and those technologies evolving and advancing over time, changing, the world that we live in?
I think one really interesting challenge in software engineering is that sometimes building big systems is just very different than building small systems. So sometimes you have this weird thing where like the experience that engineers have doesn't really map or translate well to doing more ambitious things because it is so different. And you feel this a lot actually coming out of like college curriculums. Like a lot of people who graduate with degrees in computer science and don't really know how to write software at like a modern software company that well, because they mostly worked on individual things or they worked on like really small group projects. There's a big difference between writing code by yourself and writing code with like 50 other people. It's just a very, very different process. So in terms of the future and, back to some of the things we were just talking about, actually, when we started RWX, we talked about programming language design quite a bit. And there's a language that we sponsored the development of for a while called ROC, R-O-C, that we're really excited about because of some of the principles behind the language and the ways that we felt like it could enable engineers to create technology more productively. And I think LLMs are going to solve they're going to solve the prototyping case. I think they're going to solve the like solo developer case. I think solo developers are going to be more productive than they've ever been able to be before. But I think big teams of engineers is still just an inherently different problem set. And you can feel, I'll have to refrain from trying to get too technical here, but you can feel engineers trying to like subvert that problem by architecting software differently overall. Like there's this idea of microservices where instead of building one large application, you build tons of small ones. But you've seen the software engineering community like pull back from that now because they've realized like all the different trade-offs and problems they had when trying to do that. And now, they have all these little applications, but they have this like massive distributed system with all these network calls in the middle. And various problems there. So I actually just think that there's still ample opportunity to build tools to build large software applications more productively than they're able to be built today. But it's really hard. And we were talking about this earlier too. I think it takes a lot of effort and a big investment and a long period of time to try to make a meaningful impact on that front, which is hard because then it requires the capital and the investment and the conviction, for somebody to pursue those kinds of ideas.
Right. Yeah. I think this is another great example of, software engineering being a human endeavor. Because to your point around microservices, we tend to see these, these new technologies make their way onto the scene. Things like, I don't know, back in the day when, before web services and so forth, moving to service-oriented architecture and using Corba and RMI and all this stuff. And you can see how that led us down this path. And now all of a sudden we're in a world where microservices is the new fad. And so everybody builds their applications using microservices. Everybody back in the day was building their applications using Corba services and so forth. And, I think the lesson is that those kinds of architectural decisions, those kinds of engineering decisions need to be made very, very carefully, because to your point, microservices isn't the right architecture for every kind of application. It may be perfectly well suited for certain apps, but not well suited for others. And those are the kinds of things that, to your point, probably can't be automated, especially when you think about how fast technology moves and how fast our businesses move. How can...
Yeah, for sure. I always think of like an analogy, like, can you imagine how hard it would be to build like a building or a house if there weren't like standards? If every time you went to do it, there weren't like standard plumbing fixtures and pipe sizes and electrical wires and door frame sizes, and every time you're like, well, how should we get electricity into this thing? And that's what it feels like software engineering is like sometimes. It feels like every project is just starting from scratch and having to invent every little piece, or there's just so many different competing standards. There's a famous XKCD comic about this as well, where somebody talks about like all the different standards, and then somebody proposes that there should be a standard to unify the standards, and now there's actually just like one more standard. And for a discipline that calls itself engineering, software engineering sometimes feels extraordinarily primitive.
I would agree.
Hoping we can make an impact on this at RWX, but it's a tall order.
Oh, I have no doubt you will, and that you are. But coming back to RWX, it does remind me. You mentioned earlier the language rock, and I wanted to ask: is that a language that is, can the software engineers in the audience that are interested, can they go test it out and so forth? And so, by the way, same thing applies to RWX. Maybe help give some folks some pointers in terms of how can they go out and take RWX Mint for a test drive and Rock as well.
Yeah. So Rock it's definitely still a beta stage language. I would be cautious about putting it into production. But some of the ideas behind it are really powerful. And you can go, it's open source. So you can download it, you can install it, you can write code in it. And they're making great strides, but it's tough building a programming language from scratch. I'm really excited about it, though. I won't go into the details. I know we have a fair amount of non-technical people, but I think there needs to be something like this that emerges in software engineering. And I don't know if there'll ever be like one language to rule them all, but I do think there is an opportunity for a new one. I spent a lot of my career, working in Ruby, and it was invented in the 90s. Like maybe I don't know. I think it was the 90s. I don't think it was any earlier than that, but still, a really long time ago. And it's an amazing language, but we've learned a lot since then about how to build software.
Very true.
And similarly with Java and Python and PHP, JavaScript, and now into TypeScript. It's kind of a similar story with all these languages. But with RWX, we focused a lot on great documentation. We're building tools, so we're trying to give engineers tools that they can use to more productively build software. And it's all online, self-service. You can go to rwx.com. You'll see what we're building. You can sign up and start using it. You can chat with us. We have tons of different ways you can get in contact. You can schedule time with me directly if you want. We're still early enough that that opportunity is available. May not be
Awesome.
available for too much longer, but as of today,
Mm-hmm.
I still have a little bit of capacity to extend that offer and make it available. But
Heck yeah.
I'm really thrilled by the feedback that we've gotten so far. I'm really proud of the product that we've built and our engineering team and how hard they've worked to be able to build some of this technology, because we have some, much like I was talking about around the programming language design, like we have some capabilities that other CI platforms don't have at all and like can't add. It's not like we have a feature that they don't have. We fundamentally thought about this problem space from scratch and built a fundamentally different way of approaching it, such that it feels very familiar. It's not like radically different. It's not like you have to go and like relearn things. But we took an approach that provides some capabilities that really aren't possible to be like retrofitted on top of the existing platforms. And I love both of those aspects together, that it's both familiar, yet much more powerful. Right. So this is probably like a super silly analogy, but it might be like electric vehicles. It's not like driving a car feels like fundamentally different, but the technology behind it is fundamentally different. And my analogy is probably going to break down now, but at least for the engineers using Mint, there are things that you can do that you just can't do in other platforms that really help engineering teams and provide a really great developer experience.
Yeah, that is amazing. First of all, I want to sincerely, I want to congratulate you on your success. This is it's amazing. It's amazing time, and I'm honored to be talking with you about this. So. I know we've talked a lot about technology here and so forth. I'm curious, for the business folks that are listening in, what are the things that you wish that folks on the business side of the equation better understood about technology?
I think one thing that I'd really emphasize is, I guess I'd really encourage business leaders to incorporate and collaborate with engineering more in prioritization and like decision making. I feel like there's sometimes this engineering stereotype of engineers like just being concerned about technology and technical details and not really understanding the business. And maybe that's true for some engineers. This goes back to the point around like, hey, people are different. Not everybody on the team is the same. There are engineers on engineering teams that just want to write code. They don't really want to be concerned about the business requirements or whatever. They just want somebody to tell them what to build and they want to build it. But there are engineers that are very thoughtful, very business-minded, very customer-focused. And the things that these engineers can help with is really maximizing ROI. Because I truly believe that it's easier for an engineer to understand business implications for engineers who are interested in that than it is for a so-called business person or like product leader to understand engineering implications. And if you combine those expertise, you're able to figure out how to deliver more value to your customers much more effectively. Because what happens when you don't do this is sometimes you come and you say, hey, build this and build it this way. But if you give an engineer the opportunity to look at it and say like, well, what if we built it this way instead? Or what if we took this piece that you're asking for out of scope? And like I could get the rest of that done in a fraction of the time, and I think it'd still be just as helpful. Or like maybe we'll ship that piece first and then come back and add this other piece later. If you involve engineers in that decision making, you can get a lot more done, a lot more effectively. And largely this just comes from engineering scope being unintuitive in some cases. Some product managers get very good at understanding what's easy to build and what's hard to build and what's going to have other implications later. But sometimes it's just like a little bit unintuitive because that product manager doesn't know like what frameworks are available, what libraries are available, what sort of thing is just like an off-the-shelf thing that an engineer can drop in, or heck, an LLM could probably drop it in a few minutes, versus what's going to require like a bespoke custom build to like get this thing to work right. And just because they've seen it in another app, you still don't know. You still don't know if that's like an off-the-shelf thing or like a completely bespoke custom thing that like needs to be built. So that collaboration lets you be really more effective. There's another XKCD comic that described the situation really well, where it's like, if you have an engineering requirement to identify if a picture was taken in a national park, it's actually super easy because photos are often tagged with geolocation coordinates. There's databases available of the
Mhm.
coordinates of national parks. So an engineer very quickly, like, minutes, less than an hour, could look at the metadata on a photo, compare it to a database of known locations, and tell you if a photo was taken inside of a national park. Super easy.
100%.
But if you want to know if there's like a bird in the photo, well, now you're talking about like image recognition and computer vision. And, you're going to need a team of like computer researchers in a really long period of time and like some data science models and stuff like that to tell you if there's a bird in the photo. So on the surface,
100%.
like those two things, tell me if this picture is taken in a national park, tell me if there's a bird in this photo, almost sound like pretty similar. And, one takes minutes and one takes it takes a while if it's even possible.
Much computing power.
Sure. Yeah, exactly. So, that's obviously a little bit of an exaggerated example, but I think it kind of highlights how sometimes engineering scope can vary considerably, and you just really want to involve engineers in those decisions.
Very, very well said. I almost wonder, so, when we talk about, the need for collaboration, better collaboration between business and tech, on the tech side of things, we, to your point, we talk a lot about, technologists who want to being able to speak in terms of the business. Do you think that it's the same thing on the business side, and we need business leaders who are more skilled at being able to talk tech, to make sure that we're sort of meeting in the middle, because there tends to be a bit of a dichotomy in terms of the languages that we speak, which can cause miscommunications.
Yeah, I think that's definitely helpful. But maybe even more broadly, Sean, I think the thing that can be helpful is just empathy. Like, I can't tell you how many times I've been in a situation where, something that I thought should be easy or should be done already or shouldn't be that hard. I had some assumption, and I just sat down with the person and I was like, can you show me what you're doing to like do this? And then you realize there's all these things happening that you didn't even realize, was part of the process. And just sitting down with somebody and understanding a little bit about how they work and what they do can really be enlightening. And I think that empathy can help, build trust and build understanding when you have it. So, for sure, like, I think great for, business leaders to sit down and see what it's actually like to, write code, but, also great. Like, I've learned a lot sitting next to claims adjusters, sitting next to people in finance, just sitting down with somebody and spending a little bit of time, going through whatever it is to understand, oh, this is more complex and involved than I was assuming.
Wow. I love how we've just come full circle.
Yeah.
That's just amazing. I love it. I do want to be very respectful of your time. This has been an absolutely fascinating conversation. Thank you so much for joining us. There's going to be a lot of folks that are listening to this that are new in their careers, and even folks who aren't new in their careers, myself included, would love to follow in your footsteps. Is there any, just kind of in closing, is there any advice that you'd give to someone eager to walk in your footsteps? And, especially those that are early on in their careers.
I think the main thing that comes to mind for me on this is actually similar to what we were just talking about. Yeah. I learned the most by just working really closely with other people and getting comfortable with them watching me work. There's actually this practice in software engineering that was a little popular when I began my career that sadly isn't as popular now, but is pair programming, where two engineers literally sit down and share a computer. When we were all working in person, we would literally share one computer. Like, there'd be usually we would have two screens, but they'd be mirrored, and there'd be two keyboards, but they'd be hooked up to the same computer. And,
right.
you would have two engineers sharing one computer, like kind of taking turns writing code and writing the code together. Wow, did I learn a lot about building software from doing that. Because now people do code reviews, but they only review the output of the code. They don't review like the process by which the code was written. Well, eventually, I worked with so many talented people, and they watched me work and they gave me feedback on the work I was doing. I watched them work and I'd be like, whoa, wait, how'd you do that? Or like, oh yeah, this is a better way to like debug this problem. That I just learned so much about building software. So in terms of advice for new people, I mean, that one's specific to software, but I think you could generalize it. Like, find, the best people that you can and surround yourself with them. Some great career advice is to be the worst person on the team. Like try to be in the corporate environment where you're the worst person on the team and you're just surrounding yourself with better people and learn as much as you can directly from them. And that carried forward for me. I didn't tell this as part of the Braintree story, but 8 of the first 10 people I hired were some of the most talented people I'd worked with at the consulting company. So, if you want a really talented core to build a really solid foundation of technology for a startup, go into a multi-100 person consultancy and then hire 8 of the best ones to, come with you and build payments technology. But I learned so much working, with that group of folks. And I'd say the other thing is just to be patient. As I described, like I didn't really have these outcomes in mind that I was able to achieve in my career when I started. It was just kind of like one step at a time and what I felt like was the right next opportunity for me. And, it's hard early in your career. Like, when you're just starting out, like thinking about anything in terms of years is kind of hard to do when you're only like a year into your career. But like one business quote I love is that people often overestimate what they can do in a year, but underestimate what they can do in 5 or 10 years. And I think if you're just patient and methodical and you have a lot of consistency over a long period of time, you'll end up accomplishing really great things.
Well said. Well, hey, Dan, thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks so much for your authenticity, your humility, your wisdom. And I got to tell you, I'm lucky to count you as a part of my tribe of mentors. So thanks for being with me here today. And I'm looking forward to seeing everything you're going to be doing with RWX and everything else, man. So
yeah, thanks, Sean. Thanks for having me. Really admire your focus on the Silicon Heartland and everything that you do for the community here. Really love the conversation with you. Thank you.
Thank you.